So we are not going to wait on bated breath to see what's going to happen in the country in the next. We have one of the people who are in that kitchen who will tell us today. Are we having handshake? Are we having talks? What are we going to have? Otiende AMOLLO, Senior Counsel, Member of Parliament for Arieda Constituency, Co-Chair of the Bipartisan Dialogue Committee, and very many other things. He wrote the Constitution. He's here. Mheshimiwa, good morning.
Thank you.
How are you doing?
I'm quite fine, thank you. It's a fine morning. A bit chilly though, but that's Nairobi now.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're getting used to these things.
Absolutely.
Let's get straight into the proverb. City, it's from Lesotho.
Well, it's written Lesotho, but pronounced Lesotho. Okay? As I said, why I do not really understand. Now, their prime minister, they have a prime minister, by the way. But, okay, let me get the pecking order right. They have a monarch.
Start from the king.
Okay, king. Okay? It's written Let See, but I'm told it's pronounced Let's See. I don't see how, but it's Let See the third, meaning there were two other people before him. Okay? Then they have a prime minister. His name is Sam Matekane. Okay? He's head of government. The other one is head of state. The other one is head of government.
Okay.
Right? Now, the interesting thing is the currency. You know, I've been telling you interesting things about this country. You know how countries have their own currency which they use? They use the South African rand. Okay, they have something called a Lesotho Loti. Okay? That's their own personal currency like the Kenya shilling. But the South African rand is also used. Now, it makes perfect sense because this is a country that is within South Africa. For purposes of propriety, we'll say it is landlocked. Okay? Yes.
But it's independent.
We are also told it's independent.
Okay.
Yes.
As many things.
Okay. The proverb. Sickness accompanies a waning moon. A new moon cures diseases.
Sickness accompanies a waning moon.
Yes.
A new moon cures diseases.
It does.
Mheshimiwa.
That's a tough one. But the first good thing is, at least you said it's a Lesotho proverb.
Yes.
Most people just say African proverb without saying wherever it is from. Yeah, but obviously it speaks to what is real. What is old gets ailing. What's new gets, welcome and curative. I think so.
You are spot on.
I think so.
You've explained it simply but very well indeed.
Exactly.
Exactly.
What's old, what's new, is fresh, it's curative.
It comes with hope. That freshness comes with hope.
Okay. Let's get straight into it, Mheshimiwa. So yesterday, your side of the Bipartisan Dialogue Committee says, no, we're still not interested. The other side of the Bipartisan Talks Committee says, people, come, let us talk and let's have this conversation because we have an urgent pending matter of the IEBC. Even as the others are still brewing and steaming, we have the IEBC matter to resolve. Why are you saying no and an absolute no to the talks?
Thank you. First, I want to thank all of you and thank Oko, Latif, Muga. This is my maiden appearance here.
Yes.
But I always watch you guys and I enjoy it. Secondly, although you refer to me as the chairman of the bipartisan talks, I am actually not chairman.
You're co-chair.
I am no longer co-chair. Because as far as we are concerned, those talks were suspended and we withdrawn from them. And I'll explain. So the simplest answer to your question is that I am not saying no because I'm not mandated to say the yes or no. You see, on 2nd of April, President Ruto invited Right Honorable Raila Odinga that they should have a discussion. And I think it was heated. And on 4th of April, we were invited for a parliamentary, Raila announced that he would hit. 2 days later, we were invited for a parliamentary group meeting on 6th. And it was discussed and agreed that we should hit. And it was indicated, it was agreed they form a group of 7. And we were appointed by that parliamentary group with the acceptance of the leadership. And we started engaging. Now, unfortunately, it took The person who had initiated the talks took another 5 days to name his team on 11th. You see? After naming the team, and I was already named as chair, after it took another 8 days and they had not named who their chair is. So I initiated the process of calling a meeting despite knowing that a unilateral meeting. And we called a meeting for 20th of April. Only when we called the meeting, initially they said they wouldn't attend. Then, hours to, they said they will attend. And only when they came to the meeting, they said now the Honorable Murugara was the chair. Now, then we started the initial meetings. But I'll come back to that. Let's just say that from that point henceforth, and I can show you like 6 or 7 steps, we realized that although they had called for bipartisan talks, they did not call them in good faith, they were not acting in good faith, and they were not committed. Let's just say we moved in bits and stops until finally we gave a notice, a 7 days notice, and said, if you are not going to move, then let's not give false hope to Kenyans. Decide. If within these 7 days you want us to move, let us move. If not, we will withdraw. So let me fast track to that point. At that point, we had come to the stage when we agreed that, okay, there are some urgent interim measures that must be dealt with. Okay? And there were 4. But 2 of them, one was dealing with the cost of living. The other one was desisting from interfering with political parties. Now, but we said there are 2 that do not need further discussion. One, let us stop the process of recruitment of IBC commissioners, because it's a substantive discussion we have to have. Secondly, let us write to IBC to preserve the status of the server, whatever status they are in, at least, so that when we talk about accessing the servers, there is no question that they were interfered with in the meantime. Now, at that point, they agreed, and we announced, and we agreed we were going to do the letters. We did the letters. I signed my part. When it came to my co-chair signing his part, he then said no. It's as if they got some contrary instructions. He said, he suddenly took the position that we as a bipartisan committee do not have the power to instruct an independent commission, which is IBC, or an independent panel, which is the selection panel, on what to do. Therefore, he cannot stop, cannot sign those letters. So at that point, it became a question of principle, and we asked, if we cannot stop the process of recruitment of commissioners, then why are we discussing how to recruit commissioners? Because then by the time we are done, you'll have recruited them. And once you've recruited commissioners, you cannot remove them for 6 years. If we cannot have the power to tell IBC to preserve the servers, where will we derive the powers to tell them to open the servers, so to speak? So we said, then we are talking in vain. That is the point at which we said, okay, unless you change your minds, then let's just dissolve. Let's just withdraw. And we made the presentation to a parliamentary group committee, and they agreed with us that we give that notice. They did not change their minds, so we suspended the talks and withdrew. And you know that our party leader publicly announced at Kamukunji that now we had been withdrawn from those talks. So my very good friend Honorable Murugara does me injustice when he comes on TV and invites me to bring back my team to a bipartisan talk, which he knows where we withdrew from, unless we get a fresh mandate unless properly reconstituted. Let me say one thing. The problem is this, and for those who've been involved in mediation, they know. And I can tell you, because I'm a certified public mediator and I've been ombudsman, no mediation will ever succeed, whether it's this, any other that is started, unless there's good faith. As long as there's no good faith, you will just be running around in circles. And I'm afraid there has not been good faith. Any talk such as this, you cannot start constraining yourself to the strictures of some legislation. That this law says this. Because that law is the problem in the first place. We are talking about IBC reconstitution because the law that was amended was bulldozed, and it's a problem. you cannot say, the IBC is independent and therefore we cannot interfere when first the Constitution allows anybody to access anything that IBC has. But any talk such as this is actually premised on Article 1 of the Constitution. Okay. Any commission, any judiciary, parliament exercise delegated authority. So talks that are premised on behalf of the people directly enjoys sovereignty above what any other entity enjoys. Now, that is the one thing that our colleagues from the other side never understood, have never understood, and unless they understand it, the talks will go nowhere.
Mheshimiwa, let me ask you, at the beginning, when this bipartisan committee was instituted, what was the understanding in terms of powers that were proffered to the committee?
Now, the understanding was simple. Because it was talks premised on the sovereignty of the people, it had all the broad powers that are necessary to make any recommendation, either to the Constitution or even to legislation. And therefore, you could not and you cannot constrain it by any of that. That is why in our appointment, nobody asked, but why 7 people? And where do you derive the power? Because it derives from Article 1 of the Constitution. Now, when then at that point you do not question the power to constitute the team, but when we seek to exercise what we are to do, you constrain us, then it means you are not acting in good faith.
Is there good faith on your part?
Absolutely, and I can tell you why. For the 1 or almost 2 months that we operated, I can tell you every single move that the bipartisan team took was initiated by us. We were first to name the chair. We were first to name our team. They delayed by 2 weeks. When we first met, we came with our issues. We had already had our, 5 issues. They didn't have issues. They said they needed a week. When we gave a week, they needed another week, just to identify the issues.
Yeah.
So we wasted another 2 weeks. When finally they brought their issues and we said, let's move on. Always you have a framework agreement in this kind of discussion. We had developed ours. They said, no, give us another week to develop our own. We met at Kempinski, we met at Westlands. We said, okay, take 1 week. They even identified one of their own who was to develop it, Senator Sigei. 1 week later, when we came back, they had not even drafted a paragraph. So they wanted another adjournment. So we insisted that in that case, we use, what we have. The framework agreement that was generated was developed by us. Actually, I fundamentally drafted it. So we insisted that we either use this or we break, You remember before that we couldn't start because they had included Adan Kenan, who was himself the subject of discussion.
Yeah.
Because he was a member of Azimio and we were talking about party discipline and they bring him as if to sabotage, Once we were done with that, we even agreed on the framework agreement. Then we said, let us identify the interim issues.
Yeah.
We had our 4 interim issues. They needed another 1 week. And what they came up with were not interim issues. They said now they identified 5. Our interim issues were clear. We wanted, the 2 that I've spoken about and the cost of living and interference with the political parties. Then they said their first issue is how to compensate people whose property is damaged by the demos. Their second issue is how to compensate the police who are affected by the demos. They had diversionary issues, but we say, fine, no problem. Let's just deal with them. Then when we start to deal with the interim issues, then they bring the other issues. Remember a week before that, when we had briefed our leaders, they were happy with our progress, even when we told them that we've agreed on the 2 interim issues. And you remember Raila and the principals gave a press conference where they said they were happy with the progress of the bipartisan talks. I'm sure you can remember that. So it can't be that they would say that in 1 week and then the next week they now lose the, the goodwill. It's because it then became clear that there was no goodwill on the other side. There's always goodwill on our side.
The Honorable Murugara has sat where you're seated today.
Twice.
And the last time he was here, he actually spoke about those 2 issues and those 2 letters. He says, You drafted the letters and sent the letters to him, and he looked at them. And now, you two people are senior lawyers. You're senior counsel. He's a lawyer with many years of experience. This whole argument of who can instruct, whether you can instruct, whether you cannot, I mean, we just need clarity. You wrote the Constitution. Can the Department on Justice and Legal Affairs forget about the bipartisan talks? Can it instruct the IEBC to do something?
Yes, and I'll explain why. If you want to know the lack of good faith, you start disagreeing on the use of wordings. Okay? They drafted some very loose-ended thing, to the selection panel, saying, we request you to consider, suspending. If you are doing some work and somebody asks you, we request you to consider suspending, that means you actually have that option. You can just say, no, I decline. So I changed it to say that, to give the history of the bipartisan committee and say, we as a committee have resolved to advise. Resolved to advise.
Right.
It is still advice, but it's stronger. You cannot tell me that now that's giving instructions which would be unlawful. Resolved to advise. You can still reject it, but the language is stronger. Secondly, there is no law that gives independence to the selection panel. That is for the constitutional commissions. So this idea that you cannot instruct the selection panel, where does it come from? The selection panel is constituted by the president. And as far as we know, is taking instructions from the executive. So you can't now tell us that we cannot instruct, and then at the same time, you tell us, as they were telling us initially, that there is no need to write that letter because you are advised that the speaker already told them not to continue. If the speaker can instruct them not to continue, why can't we instruct them? Secondly, about IBC, the commission. It is true that the commission, as a commission, with commissioners, cannot be instructed on how to do its work. That is true. But two things. First, I told you that the commission derives its mandate from Article 1. Okay? It is delegated authority. It is delegated from the people. As a bipartisan committee, we are exercising that sovereign power on behalf of the people. The people can instruct IBC. The people can instruct Parliament. Okay? So you see the difference. We are exercising that sovereign... I don't
see the difference, really. Parliament is the house that has representatives of the people. Right? If we just follow that argument, it's like you're saying that Parliament can instruct any independent office.
No.
Because it's the people instructing the independent office.
I want you to look at Article 1, and I can read it, okay? Start by saying, sovereign authority belongs to the people.
That's true.
And they can exercise it directly or through their elected representatives. That's number one. Then it continues to say that sovereign power is delegated to several bodies. Okay? And for these purposes, it includes independent commissions. The sovereign authority is the one that is delegated. When we are acting as the bipartisan here, and I think that's where you're losing it, we are not acting on behalf of Parliament. Remember, we were not constituted by Parliament. We were constituted by the two major factions that constitute the people. So we are exercising the sovereign authority of the people, not of Parliament.
The people did not elect you.
Of Parliament.
The people did not elect the select committee.
Yeah, but that's where you're missing it. In the last elections, it is claimed that William Ruto had just over 50%, and Raila AMOLLO just had under 50%. Collectively, the two factions represent the people for that purposes.
Okay.
When the two of them agree, even now, on a certain process, that process represents the people. They don't have to do an election to elect those people that are representing them. You understand? That is the difference. Now, let me explain the second difference. The second difference is this. The independence of commissions is in respect of what they are supposed to do. You cannot direct them how to do their work. But that does not immunize any commission. And you remember being a chair of a commission. It does not immunize the commission, okay, from doing that which it ought to do. In this case, no one is asking IBC to do anything in terms of how to do its work. All that one is saying is this. Under Article 86 of the Constitution, okay, IEBC is required by the Constitution. One of the things that it's supposed to do is to ensure that whatever voting method is used, the system is simple, accurate, verifiable, secure, accountable, and transparent. And then under Article 35, as a commission, as a state agency, any Kenyan and anyone is entitled to access anything that he has, whether electronically or physically. And all that you are doing is reminding them of their duty under Article 35 and Article 86. You're not directing them to do anything. What's wrong with that? There cannot be anything wrong with that. You see?
Yeah.
So that's why I'm saying it's a matter of good faith. If there is good faith, this would not detain you. In any case, look, if the commission is independent, and as a former ombudsman, I was independent. If anybody wrote to me, and once or twice, some people wrote to me, asking me to do something, all I did is to remind them that I'm independent. I won't do it. Why would the KK team in the talks be the ones telling us what the commission should respond to us?
Otiende AMOLLO is the Member of Parliament for Rarieda constituency. He reminds us, he was the co-chair of the Bipartisan Dialogue Committee. He wrote the Constitution, he's been the Ombudsman and many others. In how many committees are you a member?
Two. I'm in the Public Accounts Committee and the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee.
Right.
Yes.
Talking about the law. Now, we are seeing what's happening in the country at present. You know, yesterday, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga gave a media statement, and he was talking about how he's been willing to have a conversation and how he's even been willing to meet any sort of mediator. Then he goes ahead to say that a mediator had been approached by the president, and that was the president of Tanzania. But the president who invited that mediator to come into the country then again refused to meet the mediator when the mediator was in the country. And so therefore, it's just a whole confusion. The president himself goes ahead to tweet personally. In fact, he had to sign off as WSR that this is my tweet. This is I who sent this. He says, you know, I'm always available. I am ready and willing to meet. In fact, let me watch niende hivi nikam. Nikikam, tukutane, tutafutane tuongee. What's happening between these two leaders? Are you really telling me, Honorable AMOLLO, that these two leaders have never spoken since the election?
I wouldn't say that they've never spoken, but I would say that in any such situation, there are always hardliners who think that whatever end comes, let it come. But there are always the moderates who think maybe there are lines we can take. And definitely, even on our side, there must be both. But I think the more...
Which one are you?
I'm always a moderate, yes. But I think that the more challenging side is the Kenya Kwanza regime. The sense of what I get, and I got it even in the bipartisan team, I get it in how they're operating, is that there's a difference of thought in terms of the president and his deputy. First, on the idea of any dialogue, completely. But secondly, on the ambit of that dialogue, I get the sense that the president's side are fearful of any talks that takes us to 2022. Yeah, that which demands open the servers for fear of the unknown and the consequences of that unknown. But want to have a conversation about 2027 for legitimate purposes. Because in 2022, there are very many legitimate issues that arose out of IBC. And they still remain unresolved. If then you start with an illegitimate process of appointing commissioners, then it doubles the illegitimacy issues of the future. And I get the sense that they want to restrict the talks to along that line. And not in the past. I get the sense that there are those who, like the deputy president, think that any sort of dialogue might put them in jeopardy in future. That any sort of dialogue might, they have this schizophrenic fear of any discussion. So they start by saying, we can talk, but there's no nusumkati, no handshake. It's very interesting. It's like having a conversation about a boundary. Then you say, I will only come to that discussion if I will not move the boundary. Why not come and say, one of my conditions is that I'm not moving the boundary? Why? What is the fear? And I think their fear is some sort of nusumkate thing, handshake. And I don't know where that comes from. Because, and I can tell you, I was the chairman. At no time did I get instructions to entertain anything about handshake or nusumkati. And, Latif, people use handshake and nusumkati as if they're interchangeable. The nusumkati thing comes from 2007. And that's when Raila, in fact, by the admission of William Ruto, Raila won the election fair and square. He accepted to a power-sharing idea to save this country. How can that be wrong? He could have insisted. He could have insisted. In 2018, the so-called handshake, again, the country was on the precipice. And then Raila and Uhuru suddenly shook hands. That's not nusumkati. What did Raila get from the government? What did we get from government? I can tell you, because I was a member of parliament, it only brought us difficulties. Every other time there was a government bill you are supposed to support, whether you agree or not. Personally, it costed me, as you know, because I voiced my opinion several times. I was chucked out as vice chair of JLAC. What would we benefit from a handshake to help us with what? Raila doesn't need a name. He's been prime minister. So this schizophrenic fear.
So a handshake would not work for any of
we have not even sought it.
And nusumkate, though, would work.
But we have not sought it. The point, nusumkate, as Mother Karua keeps saying, we want the servers to be open so that we know who won. Then if it can be said it's us, we take the whole loaf, not half.
Why half when you can get
yes, why half when you can get the whole of it? So really, this schizophrenic fear with nusumkate. Now, that fear that I think bedevils the entire Kenya Kwanza regime was also evident in our bipartisan team. There are those, and I think the majority of them were had this schizophrenic fear of any discussion. Those who are willing to discuss were only 2 or 3. I will not name them, but that's what we saw, and that's part of why I said it.
So why come for a meeting, something that is well advertised, the whole country knows about it? Why come for a meeting when you, in essence and in spirit, don't really want to be in that meeting?
For a very simple reason, and I said it before, and I'll repeat it. There are those who believed initially that if Raila and our team called any protest, they will not succeed. And then the initial wave of protests succeeded so much that then they started worrying. And they accepted talks, yes, as a way of buying time and cooling things down. That is my theory. And once we started the talks, that's why our colleagues were very keen on just postponing things. Even when we demanded that we give ourselves only 21 days, they were talking of 90 days minimum. You see? So it was a way of cooling down temperatures and taking us all round, And so once things looked like they had cooled, I think someone decided that now, even if they pull out of the talks, the second wave of demonstrations will not happen. So when we pulled out, and now they've seen that the waves are even more serious than the first, that's when they now come and say, now come back. And as they were saying yesterday, that now we are willing to reopen discussion on the positions we took. So it's to take us round.
So there's no confusion in terms of the position that Azimio has today. For purposes of clarity, can you tell us what is it that Azimio is saying unequivocally as the position, with all the other noise that is around? I think folks want to know, where are we today? You've said there's no nusumkati, there's no power sharing that's being sought after. So what exactly is it?
Let me be clear. First, it's about the IEBC. And the IBC is not just about history, it's about the future. If we don't get to the depth of what happened in 2022, 2027 will be like a joke. We want the servers opened first so that we know the truth, but also so that we know how to deal with 2027. Otherwise, there would be no point in participating in those elections. And that's why opening the server and constitution of commissioners is number one. Yeah. Number two is the question of cost of living. And we all know where that has gotten to. And we warned them. And I think everyone else has said, even the religious leaders, that as a show of good faith, this regime should start by withdrawing the finance bill so that it can be adjusted and then address other issues in terms of cost of living. Number three is this indiscipline of raiding political parties. As we speak, we are back to worse than before multi-party democracy. We are back to a situation where MPs are being bought left, right, and center. They are not even required, as the law expects, that they go back for a fresh mandate. So multi-party democracy, which is enshrined in our Constitution, Article 3, becomes meaningless because whoever wins will just use the state machinery to buy power without seeking to go back.
Excuse me, Wakili, a quick one.
Yes.
You say that MPs are being raided and being bought easily, and they're not required to go back to the people?
Yes.
Required by? Has the law changed?
The law expects. I was elected on ODM.
Yes.
Okay. If I choose to leave ODM, and by the way, the Constitution does not even require you to do it expressly.
Yep.
You can be deemed to have crossed over. If I am deemed to have crossed over, then I'm required to seek a fresh mandate.
And
okay.
That law
From the people.
That law has not changed.
No, yes, but the tricky part is it is the speaker to declare that you've crossed over. And the speaker is subject to the majority, which is aligned to the regime. You see the rigmarole. So the Kenya Kwanza regime has no problem buying MPs left, right, and center, knowing that no speaker, because they've captured the speakership also, will ever say that now OTIENDE AMOLLO's seat is vacant. That must stop. It gets worse, not just for those in the in the National Assembly, but even for parties like the Jubilee Party. Once you choose to leave a party, as William Ruto and his guys left, I don't belong to Jubilee. But if I was to choose to leave ODM, I would not want to wreck it. Why are they wrecking Jubilee? They are wrecking it, and everyone knows. You know, that kind of indiscipline is not good for us. Stick to your side. I stick to mine. Even whether you win or lose, let's have that kind of thing. So these are the kind of conversations we want to have. Yes.
Is it humanly possible to have considered when crafting and essentially putting in place a constitution that the situation you've just described could arise, and that in the event it arises, then this is what would be done? Because it has arisen. Here we are.
Yes.
And you're dealing with politicians. Even as you sat at a council of a committee of experts, you knew.
Let me tell you, do you know no constitution in the world I know dedicates so many sections to dealing with political parties as we do? But there's only a limit of what you can do or say.
You know, I said, is it humanly possible?
So it's not, you cannot contemplate everything. There are some you leave to legislation, there are some you leave to good faith. But it is with that realization that now we are saying this is conversation that we must have in a bipartisan manner, so that even in future, it doesn't matter whether ODM or anybody who captures state power, they must be prevented from doing that. So you had asked me, what is it we want? So I'm just giving you the example of some of the kind of conversations that we need. But now, in the course of agitating for that, other issues have arisen. Cost of living is one of them. But how to deal and regulate demonstrations is yet another. The maiming and killings, what it's almost now amounting to genocide, is unbelievable. And any conversation in this country must now include things around that such massacres, because it's a constitutional right. The right to demonstrate is as constitutional as the freedom of worship. And you cannot have a country where the IG comes and says there will be no more demonstrations, I've banned them. Where, you know, the minister comes and says, I will not allow. Where the president, Ruto, comes and says there will never be demonstrations in this country called Kenya. It's like saying there will be no more freedom of worship. What do you think will happen? People will worship anyway, and they'll worship anywhere. If you want to regulate demonstrations, you start by acceptance. You accept their demonstrations, and then it means that whoever organizes the demonstrations gives you the notice. And we'll say we want to demonstrate from the airport to State House. Then the police will tell you, no, that's not practical. You do it from the airport, you know, to GPO and stop there. And you say, fair enough, then put police on all the strategic buildings along that line. And it will be from 8 to noon. But when you say there will be no more demonstrations, how do I give you notice? Because if I give you notice, I'm putting my name to be arrested and prosecuted. So we just say, let it take its own course. And that's the problem.
When you talk of massacre, when you talk of genocide, these are very serious things. We've seen people in international courts for years because of these words. Is it at that point, and you're not the first one to say it over the last few days, but again, very, very serious words when it comes to this kind of conflict that we see. It looks like it would snowball into something really serious if we're not very careful.
Yes, you know, I use those words as an international lawyer, and I'm very conscious of my choice of words. Look, demonstrations, lawful demonstrations have been everywhere in this country since they were called. In fact, even without Azimio calling demonstrations, yesterday there were demonstrations in Huruma. We didn't call them. And I'm told up to 3 people may have died. So it's not a question of Azimio. It's not a question of the Luo or anyone. But I can tell you, Oko, and we are compiling it because we are not taking this lightly. We are already compiling it. If you look at the kind of force that was sent to Luo-speaking Nyanza and some parts of the slums in this country, in this town, which were not sent anywhere else, and there were demos everywhere. And if you look at what they went to do, they did not go to quell the demos. The demos had ended. Now, these are people who are going to where people stay at in the evening and at night, kicking doors and removing them and shooting them. If you go, and unfortunately, even as I speak, there are lawyers, there are doctors in the hospitals in Siaya, in Homa Bay, in Russia. If you see the kind of maiming, the kind of injury, a boy of 17 with 9 bullet wounds, and all of them, and you saw, they're all aiming at the chest. What do you call that? What do you call that? If it was quelling riots everywhere, police would be sent generally. They would try to quell the riots, the mandamanos when they are on, not when they are not on. They would try not to kill, they would try to disable the mandamanos. What we are seeing, and we are compiling this for ICC quite seriously, and any other body that cares, the special rapporteur of the UN, the African Union, the African Court, all of them. And if you look even at the number of people who have been injured and died, it becomes difficult to come to any other conclusion.
The PS for Interior, Dr. Raymond AMOLLO, released a statement yesterday where he said 305 law enforcement officers were seriously injured, 1 was killed, while executing their cardinal responsibility of protecting lives and property. The police service also lost 158 vehicles. 9 police stations were either burnt down or severely damaged by people who were masquerading as protesters. What do you say?
Well, any loss of life is regrettable. And the loss of life of even a single police officer is regrettable. Okay? Any damage to property is regrettable. Yes? Any station that is burnt down is regrettable. But 2 things. First of all, what is the reason that we are there? The reason is that the police start by saying there can be no demonstrations. If they started by accepting it and then agreeing with the people who arrange the demos, yeah, And then we have a situation where either they have gone out of the agreed time or the agreed area, then we can be talking like that. But this is because they refuse, they try to suspend the constitution by saying there can be no demos. That's the first point. The second point is that, as regrettable as that is, I thought that as you're mentioning the one police officer who died, you should be mentioning the over 40 who have also been killed by police officers. You should be mentioning the over 1,500 who have been injured and maimed by police officers. You should also be mentioning the other destruction of property and houses that was done.
I think the point that the POs is making here is we have only heard of the other. No, but not heard of the
PS Interior is
and
PS
coming out to report,
everyone in Kenya.
Coming out to report on what has actually happened on this other side.
No, that can't.
On the security agencies, what you have not heard being mentioned by anyone, by Otiende, AMOLLO and the rest, is that 305 police officers
But who else would get that information? How would I mention it? Where would I get it from?
Now, that's why he's bringing
So
it
the
out.
point is, the PS of Interior is supposed to bring out the full thing. If you are saying deaths, say there are 50 deaths, police officers, civilians. If you are saying destruction of property, give the full hog. Injuries, 300 police officers, 2,000 civilians. Give the whole thing. Don't give it in parts. And where we are going is quite dangerous. We are going to a situation where the president of a country can call a parliamentary group meeting and tell the members of parliament and governors that you cannot sit back when these demonstrators are on. Rise up and confront them. What are you saying? Who knows, therefore, who killed who or who harmed who? Secondly, you are in a situation where the president stands up, despite what we've seen the police do, and thanks the police for good work, does not even mention those who have died or injured, does not even mention restraint. In fact, you see some dichotomy. There was a time that Professor Kindiki was more restrained. He was saying demos are lawful, as long as they're lawful, let them go on, but let there not be distraction. Then he suddenly switched. I think somebody told him, stop it. He said, there'll be no demos. The police will act. You know, what they are doing is very dangerous, because now they are setting the police against the citizens. Because the citizens will know that these policemen have ill intentions. They are coming to kill you, to maim you. Yeah. And that's a very dangerous situation.
Because it sets the people up.
Will there be more demos? Will Mandamano continue? Today we know that what has been called for was vigil and the lighting of candles for those who've lost their lives, those who've been injured and lost property, etc. Will there be more?
We've called for vigil today and tomorrow in our respective places, just lighting candles and prayers and nothing else, which I saw Professor Kindiki also has a problem with, just a vigil over somebody who has died, or is injured. And we are also taking the opportunity to help those who are in hospital, those who need further treatment and stuff like that. And we expect to have prayers. Yeah, it's prayers for those who are injured, for those who are deceased, and also prayers for the country on Friday. Once we are done with that, then we will sit down and agree on what next. Where we are right now, it is not as if the demos have been called off permanently. It is not as if they will come back, but we move stage by stage. For this week, we have decided
for today,
to
for
honor.
this week, it's these 2 days.
Yes.
Friday could be something else.
Friday is prayers. But for next week, it will be, the decision will be made.
It's also emerging at this point, Mheshimiwa, that as all these things are happening, behind the scenes, there have been all these attempts at having dialogue.
Which I really hope will
Why
succeed.
are the leaders not announcing it? Why would you go all the way to having a president visit the country, sit
By the way,
somewhere?
I'll tell you this.
Your leader in Azimio has gone to meet this president.
I'll tell you authoritatively that indeed the president of Tanzania was here, because even as our leader was going to meet her, I was with him. Okay? And even at that time, there are those who thought such meetings should not happen, even from our side. I told you. But being a person who'd rather, listen to dialogue if it's meaningful, he chose to go. And I know that he was snapped. Now, I find it The tweet you read, I find it very interesting. I didn't think that William Ruto, if he wants to speak to Raila, he would tweet him. I thought he would just call him or send somebody to call him, because that has happened before. So I'm not sure how to treat that tweet, whether it's in good faith or part of the contempt. I don't know. But I do know, like you, I actually hope that we can have a situation where we can have meaningful dialogue, not cosmetic dialogue, but meaningful dialogue. Because indeed, this country ails from a lot. And only those who don't care for the country will then think this is an Azimio problem. But they know the protests are no longer about Azimio. In fact, I think that the country as a whole and the KK regime is lucky that so far in Raila Amollo Odinga and the Azimio leadership, there can be some form of control that now call it off. The day they are not there and they lose that control, then you will wish that there was somebody to be calling it on and off.
I am happy at some point that I am ignorant of the law. I don't have the knowledge you have. And that's why I can ask the question I'm going to ask. What is it that prevents Azimio from having what us laymen refer to as a shadow cabinet? People who can counter whatever government says and does at every stage. For instance, now you have the PS for Interior speaking. If you had a shadow interior, the shadow interior minister would say, look, if we're talking about the Ministry of Finance, the Treasury, and they issue a statement, you would be saying, no. We, as Azimio, would be our thoughts. Because the thing we associate Azimio now with is Maandamano. And yet, they're saying things are bad. There's a clear and loud absence of what they would do if they were in that position.
Two things. First, you realize that before 2010, we kind of used to have that. Even in Parliament, and you had a minister of government, and there would be a shadow minister from the opposition and all. What killed that was the system of government that we adopted in 2010.
How did it
the
kill
presidential
it exactly?
system.
Yeah, how did it kill it?
Because there's no one to shadow. You see, then ministers were in Parliament. So as the Minister for Interior would be saying this, even the Speaker knows that the first right of reply you'll give to Latif, who's the shadow. Now ministers are not in Parliament. So even if you are shadowing him, you are speaking to yourself. He's speaking from a press conference somewhere in Turkana. You are busy speaking from Parliament. You are saying your own
You don't
thing.
have to speak from Parliament.
Yes, so there's no one to shadow.
For Paranya could be speaking from wherever,
but
as Professor Njogona Ndongo is speaking from wherever.
But that's why we keep speaking from wherever. But the second thing is this. Essentially, the idea of shadowing works in a proper parliament that functions. I can tell you that the parliament that we have come to be does not function in that manner. In fact, and I've complained on record, now even the idea of having the majority having, the minority having their say and the majority having their way is not there. It is the majority having their say and the majority having their way. Because even the opportunity to speak is completely skewed. So even if you talk, you're just talking in vain. And and the worst thing, and I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, the worst thing in Parliament right now, there's something called put the question. Whatever good idea or contribution you bring, one person speaks, and then you hear somebody tell the speaker, put the question. And they put the question, and since they're the super majority, they say yeah, and that's the end of that matter.
Done.
Whatever ideas you have, you go back to your house with it.
When you were drafting the constitution, of course, on this particular matter of system of government, you sort of left it to the political class to thrash out and agree. But what did you envision this parliament to be like?
Latif, and these Kenyans need to know, the committee of experts recommended a parliamentary system in the harmonized draft constitution. We did not recommend a presidential system. If you ask me, even up to today, part of the problem we have, and we'll continue having it, is having this pure presidential system that we've adopted, that essentially you have two broad formations of almost equal strength, and whoever is declared winner takes everything. It's not really good for us. At that time, the members of parliament then introduced the presidential system as a bargaining chip if I might remind you, what was the ODM side then, wanted a parliamentary system.
Pure parliamentary.
Yes, but they also wanted devolution. What was then, it was called what? The DP. Yeah? Wanted,
PNU side.
Yeah, PNU side. Wanted a presidential system and no devolution. So the bargain, the trade-off was, we take devolution, we take the presidential system. That's essentially how we ended up here. One of the things we must revisit is this presidential system. It's not good for us.
Otiende AMOLLO, we thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Asante sana. Otiende AMOLLO is the member of parliament for Orienda constituency. He was in the Committee of Experts and Constitution Review. He is a member of the Justice and Legal Affairs Committee in Parliament. He was, until just recently, for maybe 3 weeks, co-chair of the Bipartisan Dialogue Committee.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.